Hey, Dr. Jess here, and today I'm going to give you all the tools you need to be a successful runner. So first, what we're going to talk about are shoes. Shoes are one of the main categories where you can make a big impact on how you feel while you're running. I've got two different examples of shoes. There are so many types of shoes. It can be overwhelming, but just to kind of give you a quick example of a drastic difference between shoes here. So one shoe is going to have a really big cushioned effect. It's going to have a roll here for that over the raise of the foot. And the shoe is going to be doing a lot of help for you. So like on long runs, on concrete, not wrong to use a shoe that's going to help to dissipate some of that impact. I've got a different shoe here. This shoe has a very, very different structure. So it still is going to have a drop. This is not a freestyle shoe. The shoe is doing some of the work for my foot. You can see as I bend, this doesn't collapse. So it's going to still give me some help and some support, some cushion, but it's not going to help me as much as the first shoe does. So when you think about shoes, you want to go to a store that has very knowledgeable people because there's so many different shoes on the market. You want a shoe that's going to be effective for you and your foot or feet. Some feet are stiff, some feet are a little bit too mobile, some feet are right in the middle. And the traction that you need, so if you're on a trail versus on concrete, that's going to make a difference as well. So the shoe does make a big difference. All right, so number two we're going to think about is your skin integrity on your feet. It's very common to get blisters as a runner, and that's a bummer because it's going to shut you down for a little bit, or it's going to open up and it's going to just be painful, and it doesn't need to be. So a sock like this sock, so you can see this is very worn. I've worn it for many, many runs. This is a Smartwool sock. I like it a lot because it's thin, so it's going to contour to my foot, but I've got a little bit of support to the arch that's kind of built into the sock. It's got a little bit of height to it, so it's going to protect my ankle from where the shoe is hitting me. And so now when my foot is inside the shoe and it's got a little bit of movement that's happening, this sock is staying with my foot. It's not allowing my foot to slide against the fabric. So that's what kind of builds up those blisters. So finding a sock that works for your foot and isn't pure cotton that gets wet with sweat and heavy. So that isn't helpful at all if you're going to be in that duration of a run for, over 30 minutes, an hour, sometimes multiple hours. So skin integrity, make sure that's high on your priority list. So number three, we're going to talk about is hydration. So when you start a run, you want to make sure you're hydrated prior to running. During the run, ideally, if you're going to be out for more than 30 minutes, it's a good idea to bring some water or water and electrolyte mix with you. And then after the run, you're also going to then want to continue your hydration. When you're sweating, whether or not you realize it, when you're working, you're sweating. It might be dissipating quickly, so you're not all built up with sweat. If it's humid, you're just going to be covered in sweat because it's not dissipating well. Either way, you're losing fluids from your body. So I prefer running with a vest because it doesn't bounce, it doesn't move when I wear a waist belt. It just doesn't work that well for me. I know other people like a waist belt. Other people like to carry some water in their hands. Other people will have a bottle that they'll drop somewhere if they're doing an out and back, and they'll pick up that water on the way back. Neither is wrong. The whole answer is that as long as you're staying hydrated in your own way, that's what the key is. The other thing to think is, if you're going to be out for a while and you're sweating a lot, replacing with electrolytes is going to be key. I run in Florida, I run year round. So I drink electrolytes during my run, and I'll have a little bit afterwards as well, just to make sure that I've replenished that salt balance, that electrolyte balance from how much I've been sweating. So sometimes water alone is not enough. Number four, we're going to talk about nutrition. So when you're on a run, the number one thing we want to think about is if you're out for a long time. So let's say over an hour or so, we're really going to have to think about glucose regulation. Otherwise, if you don't have something to replenish your glucose stores, you can really start to tank on that run. So it's very easy to bring something that has a fast release of glucose. Fruit is one thing. That's something that's a little bit hard to bring on a run. So that's why some people will bring goos or gummies, things like that, where you can kind of at mile 5, take a little bit. Mile 7, get a little bit more. Mile 10, a little bit more. And it's just going to help that glucose level from coming from here, eating breakfast or whatever you might eat. And then as you run, dropping. And then all of a sudden you're like really tanking. You don't know why. I'm telling you, like, make sure you keep that glucose regulated and that run will feel better, especially if it's a long run. So number 5, we're going to talk about weather. This is going to be a big one. I always like to make sure I check the radar and temperatures before I go out on a run. Ideally, you kind of plan this in advance as well. It's going to determine the time of day you run. So if it's summertime like it is right now, I'm going to want to think about the sun overhead. So I've got eye protection, sunscreen. I really want to think about my heat dissipation. So if it's hot outside already and I'm running, I'm going to build more heat. How do I release that heat? So I'm not big on wearing a hat with like the whole hat is over my head. I'll wear sunglasses and I leave the top of my head open to the air because that way that's another way for me to dissipate heat. Other people really like to have, some sort of like visor on, which is much better than wearing a hat itself. This is going to be different than in the winter. In the winter, we're going to make sure that we're nice and warm when we start on our run, but we're going to want to wear layers because as we start warming up, now we're going to have to start stripping those layers off so that we can dissipate the heat that's building up. So just kind of prepping in advance for whatever the conditions are. It's going to be key to keeping you, one, safe, but then also comfortable as you're going on that run, because that's the idea, is making sure that you enjoy it. So the last one we're going to talk about is your clothing choice. So there's a couple of key things we always want to think about when we're running. Is a synthetic material is always going to be better than cotton. When you sweat, cotton gets wet, it gets heavy, and it holds the water. Synthetic materials are much better about dissipating that fluid, so you're not going to get a nice heavy material on you, which is just annoying and can cause chafing or blisters. The other thing we want to think about when we're running is if you're wearing shorts, the inseam of the short is going to matter. So that's going to be a specific preference to you. Some people like a longer inseam, so there's more fabric. Some people like a shorter inseam. Either way, you're just going to have to play with it to see what your preference is. But typically, something that's looser fitting around the legs, but then something that is nice and form fitting around the waist so it doesn't move with you. You want it just to stay in place. I like a little bit of a thicker waistband because I feel like that way it just doesn't have any chance of digging in anywhere and be uncomfortable. When we think about our tops, for a female especially, when you're thinking about your sports bra, if you have any sort of sports bra that compresses around your diaphragm, so if you find your rib cage and come right underneath the rib cage, that's going to be one of your main muscles that you use for breathing. So if we wear stuff that's really tight around that diaphragm, it makes it hard to take that deep breath, which is just going to make it harder for you to get the oxygen in, and you're going to be working harder than you need to. So ideally, that sports bra is going to end above the diaphragm, so above the end of the rib cage, and that way it's not overly tight where it's like uncomfortable. So that's going to be super key for breathing. Your top that you wear, honestly, it can be anything that is comfortable to you. If it's really hot outside, not having a sleeve on is going to be helpful because it's just more area for you to get the heat away from you. So the key is in the summer, get the heat off of you. That's just key. That way you stay safe. In the winter, it's making sure you wear layers. So that way, as you start warming up, like a running vest is key. Having like lighter weight things that you can unzip to kind of get the heat away as you start warming up is going to be key. So try it on, find stuff on sale. It doesn't have to be the most expensive thing as you can possibly spend. It's more about personal preference, but then thinking about function at the same time. Preparing for your run involves a number of items that we want to think about in advance. So we want to think about our water. We want to think about nutrition and glucose regulation. We want to think about the type of shoe that we're wearing and the type of sock that we're wearing. Also, we want to think about how we're going to be prepared for the elements, whether it's sun, whether it's cold, whatever that might be. And we want to make sure that we're thinking in advance about our clothing choice. Because if we get all of this together and it's ready to go on that run day, then you're ready for success.